beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. In this video I'm covering a common yet frustrating issue that every homebrewer faces at some point, the dreaded stuck fermentation. If your yeast has suddenly decided to take an unwanted holiday during fermentation, don't worry, this video will provide you with the knowledge and solutions that you need. So first things first, what exactly is a stuck fermentation? Essentially it's when your yeast stops fermenting your wort before reaching the desired final gravity. In other words, your yeast has stopped doing its job and your beer is stuck in a limbo. You might catch this early if your pH levels aren't dropping as expected within the first 24 hours, and of course you bother to check them, but because beer doesn't ferment at a constant rate, you shouldn't panic unless your gravity reading has stagnated for between 48 to 72 hours. Do not rely on just your airlock to determine a stuck fermentation, as your airlock could have a leak and it could also be affected by air pressure. In order to determine the situation, it is vital to use a regular hydrometer along with a sample of your wort. This also applies if you are using a digital floating hydrometer like I am for many of my brews, as these hydrometers can get stuck, so it is best to verify in times where things are looking like something is going wrong, just to be certain. So what causes this rather annoying issue? There are several culprits, including dead or unhealthy yeast, pitching too little or too much yeast, lack of nutrients, temperature issues, or even strain-specific genetic quirks. So let's break this down further. If your yeast is unhealthy or if you've pitched too little, fermentation can slow down or stop altogether. Temperature is also another potential factor. Too cold and your yeast might go dormant, too hot and you can end up with autolysis, or worse, dead yeast. Okay, so you've determined that your fermentation is stuck, now what? The first thing to do is to check the temperature. Is it too cold? Warm it up. Is it too hot? Cool it down. If temperature isn't the issue, you can then try the following methods. Sometimes yeast just needs a little nudge to get back to work. A technique that will rouse your yeast, as it is known, is usually going to do the trick. To do this, you simply give your fermentation vessel some swirling back and forth and left and right movements. This will hopefully wake your yeast up and get it back to its feasting. If rousing the yeast fails, then another alternative before repitching yeast is to introduce small amounts of simple sugars or pureed fruit. Sometimes yeast simply runs out of fuel. Adding a new sugar source can re-stimulate fermentation. This is not a technique that I have used very much in truth, but some people absolutely swear by it, so I have decided to include it. It is also something to try if you simply do not have any further yeast due to bad planning, as it is always a very good idea to have some backup yeast, of course. An easy simple sugar to use would be common table sugar. Add 15 to 20 grams to 150 milliliters of water. This should be boiled and then cooled before adding it to the fermentation vessel. If your yeast has truly gone kaput, add some fresh, healthy yeast. High attenuating strains like US-05 can work wonders for finishing off a stuck fermentation. I would recommend that you add this to a starter on a heated stir plate if possible, as shown, and only pitch when you know the yeast has been active in the starter. When you are creating your starter, be sure to add yeast nutrients. If you didn't add yeast nutrients to the brew originally, then you can give yourself a reprimand for this, because that very cheap and easy step could have well avoided your stuck fermentation in the first place. All too often I see that not all brewers use yeast nutrients, and yet they are the cheapest insurance plan for your brews that you will never really know when they are needed. But let's face it, that's also very typical of any insurance. If these steps did not result in a restarted fermentation, then something more serious is wrong, and frankly you are not going to resolve it for this one. This could be something that was at fault within your brew that has created a wort that is not as fermentable as desired. Even if you are still some distance away from your predicted final gravity, quite often such beers will still be more than drinkable, so always continue with the next steps just in case, unless you were unable to ferment the wort at all, which is going to be rare. Either way, there is some learning ahead to get back on track, which will be very much worth the effort, I can assure you. I do hope that you found this video useful, informative and interesting. If so, why not consider liking and subscribing? For further support, you can join the channel's Facebook group, and if you would like to support the channel, then check out the channel's merchandise store, as all profits go back into the channel. Until next time, happy brewing!